Washington's getting some big pieces back on the offensive line, and that's a major key to the game.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward Mazda Move and Be Moved. Just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you don't miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, Lars, we got one of our favorite shows of the week, our keys to the game. So that means bold predictions, your score prediction coming at the end, defensive keys to the game. But as always, we start on the offensive side of the ball, and there's no bigger key than blocking for Dezmen Williams and Jonah Coleman. And Jedd Fisch said during his Thursday press conference that it's trending very well. They're going to make a game time decision, but it's trending very well that both Carver, Willis, and John Mills will be back in the lineup.
And so when you think about, Jedd's lingo, all those types of things, you would have to imagine Carver's probably going to play, given the way he was walking off the bus last week, and John Mills not being on the scooter. Promising sign there. I think that one was always kind of just more of a aid for him. It wasn't hey, this is a debilitating long-term injury. And I think, Jedd usually doesn't speak in a positive-ish light if he knows for a fact they're not going to play. He would say, they're probably doubtful, or we'll see. We're not so sure. We got some more tests to run, things like that. He didn't insinuate anything like that. So I think if you have Carver and John Mills back, that is a massive, massive difference. You are going to this game so much more confident if you're Jonah Coleman, if you're Dezmen Williams, than you are. And that's no slight to Max McCree and Pocky. Those two did a suitable job, but there's no question about it that when Carver, Willis, and John Mills are your starters, it is a significant level up for both Dezmen Williams and Jonah Coleman.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that we talked about this a little bit on yesterday's show. And as the forecast for this weekend continues to show rain, it's not quite as much as it looked like a couple of days ago, but that's something to still keep in mind, because this is one of those games where Washington needs to establish its will on the ground. And I think that that's something that Jedd Fisch and Jonah Coleman and Dezmen Williams are going to want to do after the struggles we saw last week at Michigan. And it's just one of those games where Illinois' defense is solid against the run. They're 10th in the Big Ten Conference, allowing 110 yards per game on the ground. And with this tandem that you have in the backfield of Dezmen Williams, of Jonah Coleman, you also, another thing that our good buddy Jake Butt mentioned earlier in the week is that they only forced 2 missed tackles against Michigan. This Illinois team is coming into this game with 55 missed tackles on the year, according to Pro Football Focus. So this is one of those games where you have an opportunity to make some plays on the ground in space, where I'm curious to see what it's going to look like in terms of how their front seven decides to commit to Jonah Coleman versus Dezmen Williams, which is something that we've heard from players and coaches all year long has been a big focus of the game plan. And if you're able to get off to a hot start, which is the other thing we absolutely need to talk about here, all of a sudden things are going to open up for you, because we haven't seen this team score a point in the first quarter since the Washington State game. Like, they're overdue to find a way to start fast.
You would think so, but at the same time, does a rainy, soaked afternoon at Husky Stadium lead to that? I don't know, but I think at the very least, you have to be ahead at the end of the first quarter. You have, even if it's 7-3, 10-7, 10-3. Something in the form of get some points in the first quarter. And I know we talked about, when we talked about going into the Michigan game, even if you have 2 field goals in your first drive, that's still points in the first quarter that you haven't had the past 4 or 5 games. I don't even know how many goes back to Wazoo at this point. But it really does stem, and Jimmy Doherty talked about it, Jedd Fisch talked about it. Yeah, winning in the fourth quarter is great. But if you're down 10-0 early, and then you're down 17-10.5 or whatever it ends up being, why make it harder on yourself? Just get some points from every other drive, and that means you score in the first quarter, no matter what. And I think that will give the offense so much more confidence than they have had in the past few weeks.
I think a big part of starting fast is finding ways to get these receivers involved early. And it's not just Denzel Boston, where I really like this matchup for him especially against this Illinois secondary, which is out without their best defensive back, Xavier Scott, for I believe the rest of the season, which is unfortunate because he's a really fun prospect to watch in terms of the NFL draft and everything. But this is one of those matchups where they've dealt with some injuries on the back end throughout the year. Most of those guys are back and healthy, but I look at Raiden Vines-Bright, Dezmen Roebuck, Decker DeGraff, where it doesn't look like Quentin Moore is going to be able to suit up this weekend. Washington has so many pass catchers that you can turn to outside of Denzel. And if one or two of those guys can rip off chunk plays early on in this game, all of a sudden you're firing on all cylinders. Things just look a little better than they have for you in previous weeks where, I mean, you get down into the red zone against Rutgers and then you miss a field goal. Like those things do happen. It's unfortunate. And it's not necessarily what you're looking for, obviously, but that's part of these things that do happen over the course of the game. And it's just Washington needs to continue to find a way to score touchdowns. Huge shocker here, right? Oh, hard-hitting analysis, finding a way to get in the end zone. But if you're able to do that early on in the game against a high-powered offense like Illinois is, and forcing them to play from behind, forcing them to play catch-up for just even from the word go is so important. And it's something where in these two losses, you haven't really been able to do that. You haven't been able to establish your will. You found the end zone once against the two best teams that you've played. That's not good enough. And against Rutgers, great, you're able to do that. But this is one of those games where if you're able to, I don't want to say run up the score early because I really do believe this is going to be a very, very close game for all four quarters. But if you're able to get off to a hot start, you're not looking at, at a 10-0 lead, a 13-7 lead, whatever it might be. One of these leads that you've had to overcome in your last two wins against Maryland, against Rutgers, because this Illinois team is much better than both of those teams, and they're not going to allow that.
I agree with that. And I think the other thing to kind of tie all those things together is stay on time, stay on schedule. That's something where it factors in both for Dezmen and Jonah. Get Dezmen some easy rhythm throws, get Jonah some good carries, open up, those 4 or 5 yard chunk plays where you're not at a 2nd and 7, you're at 2nd and 4 or 3, so that if you do happen to get to a 3rd down, it's 3rd and 1. And yeah, we talked about you'd almost rather be in 3rd and 10 than 3rd and 1 if you're UW because you had better success from the longer distance. Again, it's about giving the offense confidence, especially for Dezmen, where coming off his first 3 interception game of his career, that just give him some confidence boost early. Give the offense a reason to feel that they can win this game and not get down early. I think, if you're talking about this being a scoreless first quarter, that just kind of, I'm not saying it's deflating, but it almost seems like here we go again,
Sure.
Rinse and repeat, run it back. And especially being at home, that's the other thing. Yeah, it's probably not going to, Jedd said it's going to be probably sold out or close to sold out. I really hope so because this team could use it, but I don't have a ton of faith in Seattle people showing up in the rain. We've been there before. Like, you probably get 50, 60,000 actually showing up, but it's not going to be a full sellout. How much of those were Illinois fans, which we do know they do travel very well. We saw that at the basketball game last season that I remember going to. And, that's great, but it can't become a neutral field in a sense where if the fans leave at halftime and now you're talking about a 3rd quarter game that Illinois fans are just as loud, that you can't afford that if you're UW. So,
well, it's friends and family weekend. So I have faith in the crowd and everything. I don't doubt any of that. And obviously you can chalk up the last UW home game to what else was going on across town with the Mariners, everything game 5. But I do see where you're going with that because we look at the crowd, especially in a game like this, where again, there's some rain in the forecast. We'll see what it's going to look like. That's going to be a huge help on the defensive side, especially when it comes to the front 7. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Mazda. This episode is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. This week's moment that moved the game forward is Jonah Coleman. Not only did he get into the end zone for Washington's only touchdown of the day against Michigan, but he was named a finalist for the William V. Campbell Trophy, which is also known as the Academic Heisman, which is such a tremendous honor for him. Jonah, team captain this year, is one of those guys who on and off the field is moving the game forward each and every week. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. So Lars, when we look at the defensive side, the number one key here is finding a way to get a pass rush on Luke Altmyer. And I like where Washington's defensive line and front seven is in terms of health coming into this game, but it's about finding ways to get consistent pressure. And I think that this battle between Bret Bielema and Ryan Walters is one of the more underrated storylines of the week, obviously with Ryan Walters being the former Illinois defensive coordinator. I think that he's going to have some stuff drawn up that we look at that game last year between Illinois and Purdue that ended 50-49. It's very clear that these guys know how to play each other very, very well. And I'm really excited for what kind of chess match we might be able to see, because Walters has certainly evolved a lot this season in terms of what he's calling coverages, different things like that. I was talking with some of the guys over at ESPN Radio in Champaign, and they talked about, when he was here, it was 99.9% bare front, man on the outside. He's absolutely changed up from that, but in a game like this, we need to see whatever that front might look like. It needs to hit home on Luke Altmyer.
I agree with that. And I think also, you got to talk to Zach Derby this week as well. And I think that's the key where it all starts is we saw him the last time, basically against Wazoo. When you talk about the offense, the last time it scored in the first quarter was against Wazoo. That's when we really saw Zach Durfee emerge. And I think this is the game where, his eligibility clock, who knows what it is at this point, but he's running out of time. Let's just put it that way. And so for Zach to make a statement this week, I think it starts with him. He's the guy where if you have him bringing one pressure and you have Jacob Lane on the other side, that is a much better defensive front that you're working with. So Ontario Thompson, Simone Peppa, you go down the list of interior guys that can make a role, that can make an impact in this game. But it starts outside, because if you can throw Luke Altmyer off his timing and off his clock, that changes the complexion of this game. And then you can, add, like you're saying, the layers to this defense that Ryan Walters can throw, whether it's Alex McLaughlin or Sean Clark at the nickel. There's a number of things you can do, but it only starts if you have that effective pass rush. And we haven't seen it on a consistent basis, but I have a hunch one of those guys are going to pop this weekend.
So one guy who I want to talk about in the same light, because we don't know if we're going to see Jacob Manu for his fourth and final game of the redshirt season this weekend against Illinois, is Zadrius Rainey-Saleh. This is the guy who I think in terms of what he brings athletically could be a really fun just wrinkle at outside linebacker in a game like this, where when we talked to Ryan Walters about him on Tuesday, it's one of those things where they want to use him inside. They want to use him outside. They want to find different ways to get him involved. And now that he's continuing to get healthier, coming off the torn ACL that he suffered at Bethel High School last year, this is one of those games where, depending on what Illinois is going to throw at you, you can throw him out there on the field for a higher snap count, 20, 25, 30. I think we're starting to get up into that range. And I know Ryan said that the number one thing in that is making sure his body holds up, which is obviously by far the most important thing. But I just think that Zadrius is one of those guys who can throw such a nice wrinkle in there. And it's not just because of what he can do as a pass rusher. You can have him line up at outside linebacker and still drop into zone coverage, because I think in terms of athleticism and ceiling, when it comes to that area of the game, and I mean, this is no slight to any of Washington's other linebackers, he is obviously the highest ceiling in that regard. And, obviously recruiting rankings, all that sort of stuff backs it up. But just listen to any coach on the staff talk about what Zadrius brings to the field as a pure athlete. I think that this could be a real breakout game for him. And especially when you look at what Illinois is going to throw at you from not just a passing game perspective, but how they utilize their tight end. That's something that I'm going to be watching very, very closely.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Cole Rusk, that's a guy that he might not have a ton of catches or targets on the season, but go look at what he did in 24. Like, that was a guy that made a significant impact for Illinois. And the numbers might not indicate it this season, but that could be a guy where if you don't take care of him, he goes off for like 110 and 2 or 3 touchdowns. He has that type of potential. And I think this is a game that, kind of goes one of two ways. If you handle your assignment, if you play assignment football, it's a 3 to 7 point game. If you don't, and you don't use Zadrius effectively, if you don't use some of these guys, that we can go down the list of in their right roles, then it could get sideways. And I have faith that Ryan Walters, we've talked about him enough this season in terms of making adjustments, but also being put in the position in the game where you get down to a point where you have to make those adjustments. I'm not saying he needs to, but I think he's starting to figure out to make those adjustments before they happen. Counter punch before you get punched. That's where I think Ryan Walters is going to succeed this weekend. And Zadrius is kind of one of those, I don't want to say X factor, but in a way, because, actually Alexander is another guy in that light where I think he could have an interesting role this weekend as well. but playing both of those guys potentially maybe at the same time. I think, whether Zagreus ends up covering, the tight end or ends up being a pass rusher, I think one of those two is going to alternate. And no matter what, one of those guys is going to end up having a really good weekend. The other will still have a solid day. But I just think when you look at the final box score and what ends up being the tale of the story of this game, that's going to make or break what ends up happening for Washington.
So I agree. And the reason we want to talk about this is I think that there's a lot more to talk about on the pass coverage side when it comes to just what Washington has done this year, because this is a game where I don't look at it as extreme as Maryland, who are by far last in the conference in rushing attempts. But Illinois is near the bottom in terms of yards per carry. They're 17th at the conference at 3.48, and they're 16th in rushing yards with 831. That's in the Big Ten. This team just does not run the ball a lot and does not run it effectively either. So I look at, a guy like Hank Beatty in this game. I think that he's someone who Luke Altmyer, obviously all year, has turned to early and often. And I'm curious to see how Ryan Walters wants to match up against a guy like that. Do you can do different things where you can bracket him with Rashawn Clark or Leroy Bryant and Ryland Dillard-Allen or Michaela Steen, whatever. Is that the way you want to do it? And then go man coverage on the outside like you like to with Ephesians, Prysock, and Tacario Davis and force these other guys on the outside to beat you one-on-one? I don't know. But there are so many different things that you can do in this game where I think that this is one of those matchups where Washington's run defense has the bodies to shine through and continue to perform effectively like they have this season outside of the Michigan game, where, again, they're still sixth in the conference, allowing just over 97 yards per game on the ground. So it's still a really solid unit in that regard. And this is one of those games where it's just good. I feel like it can be a numbers booster for you in that department by the end of the year. But I look at Washington in the secondary. I think they have all the talent in the world to succeed there. All the advanced stats, you dive into any advanced number for Tacario Davis when he's on the field. He has been one of the nation's best cornerbacks this year. I know the guys over at PFSN have done a really great job covering that and putting it all on Twitter. Ephesians Prysock has been one of the most improved corners in the Big Ten this year. He's had a really solid year, but it's just a matter of that whole unit coming together as a whole. And a lot of that has to do with the safeties and the safeties in coverage in particular, because we haven't seen them completely step up. Ryan Walters talked about the touchdown to Zach Marshall and how that was just one of those breakdowns on the back end, and it looks really bad at the end of the day. Those are the things that you can't have in a game like this against an opponent like this, because Luke Altmyer and this veteran Illinois passing attack is going to take advantage of moments like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that Jedd Fisch also talked about in his Thursday press conference, where he said that their quarterbacks, meaning UW, Tacario Davis and Ephesians Prysock, are the best they've been this season. Like, they're at their full health. And so I think that is also another confidence booster where you can leave them out on the island and really be tested. And you have Alex McLaughlin, who's, I don't want to say kind of flown under the radar, because it's no slight to him. It's not like his game has regressed, but it just seems like his impact hasn't been able to be felt as much because of some other deficiencies. And so I think if you have, the effective pass rush that we've been talking about, and Tacario and Ephesians are able to lock it down like they have been the past couple, they have the potential to do, I should say, then you're able to have Alex be that guy that can, if he ends up having 12, 13 tackles in this game, I won't be surprised, little teaser for next segment. But just, you look at it and say, when Alex is at his best, it's when he is always around the ball. When he's having to cover 2 or 3 different other assignments, you're kind of taken away from where he truly shines best. And it's not a slight to Alex. It's more or less just let your best players shine brightest, because you have everybody doing their job. When some guys aren't able to do their job effectively, now you're talking about, taking away from other people's success. That's where I think, UW has the both talent and coaching to make this a win, but, we still got to see it happen.
And again, that starts up front. That starts with the pass rush, because that has been one of the biggest questions on the Illinois side all week long, is what is this offensive line going to look like, where it seems like they're starting to get healthy. They're starting to gel a little bit better in terms of the pass protection. That's why they haven't been able to run the ball effectively. That's one of the reasons, is the run blocking has not been there. So if you're able to find a way to get some pressure with somebody like Taitayu Youngulele or Bryce Butler, all of the names that we've thrown out here for weeks and weeks and weeks, this is one of those games where you have an opportunity to do that. And against a guy like Luke Altmyer, who can move a little bit if you need him to, but it's certainly not, nobody's on the Demond Williams level at this point in time, but it's not one of those things where he's going to roll out and try to look to make plays with his legs early and often in this game. If you can find a way to get some pressure, especially from the interior, you can throw off so much of this Illinois game plan. And with that being said, let's make some bold predictions. because we've got a message from our good friends over at DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Washington, Alex McLaughlin delivered in a big way. In a game where Washington's defense struggled, Alex stepped up once again, was Washington's leading tackler. When the pressure was on, he came through, no hesitation, no delay. And if you've been watching week after week, this performance wasn't a fluke. Alex is on a streak. And just like Alex delivered for the Huskies, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. We've also got a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to play. I built parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live lines during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats just like I do, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, we're back for some bold predictions, and in traditional Locked On Huskies fashion, I forgot who's supposed to go first this week. I think it's my turn. I don't know. So I guess I'll take it.
Take it. It's all yours.
All right. Let's go with that. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. And I want to go back to something that we were talking about yesterday and tying this in with the first segment with with John Mills and Carver Willis back in the picture. I like Jonah Coleman a lot in this game. So I know I made something really similar to this one a few weeks ago, but I think it's actually going to hit this week. I know, famous last words. I have Jonah Coleman going for 125 yards from scrimmage and 2 touchdowns in this game. I want to go with yards from scrimmage because I think he does get over 70 rushing yards, but I love the way Washington has been using Jonah as a receiver in the screen game, out of the backfield. There's so many different things that he has just shown such great advancements in his game this season as a pass protector, everything you want to say. But this is one of those games where in the rain, Washington is going to lean on him. And I think that he is going to get back to his ways of breaking tackles. And I think Illinois will have an answer eventually, but he's going to be a key factor in this game.
See, I like that. And it's just like the Jonah, I would just put those stats as UW total rushing in terms of Dezmen and Jonah.
That's fair.
Jonah will probably have, I agree, probably between 70 to 90, somewhere in that realm. I don't think he breaks 100 just because, again, something about the rain just kind of screams like, hey, it's not really going to, it's going to be to your favor on some level, but it's not going to be as pretty a football as you're going to want to see. But I do think also Dezmen's going to add another element to his game there again. But with that being said, one thing that I look at in this game is if you're going to have someone pop off that we're not talking about, that we've been talking about, I think it's Dezmen Roebuck. I think this is a game where it just screams somebody's going to reemerge or emerge. And again, this is going to be a theme here for me because it's going to be on the defensive side as well. I would put Dezmen Roebuck's final numbers, total yards, 120 total, so it's not going to be a 100-yard receiving game, to be clear. I think he's going to find a way to make an impact in a different way as well. But I look at this and say, if you can find that second or third option, because Denzel, everyone knows Denzel. Denzel should get his targets, but Illinois is probably going to have a plan on some level for him, and he'll get his targets. But we've seen at times where, teams kind of almost sacrifice over and above to prevent Denzel from being the guy. Like, look, it's almost like, in basketball where it's like, hey, we're going to put 2 or 3 guys on you and we're going to force everybody else to beat us. And by the way,
unless that's Victor Wembanyama, who I can't go down this train right now. He was insane in that game against Dallas. Yeah,
I was going to say Wemby is a, shall we say, different character in that realm. But, you just look at what Dezmen's able to do. He's always been that security blanket for Dezmen this season. And yeah, you could say the same thing about a couple other guys, but give me 120 total yards for Dezmen. And I do think he gets another touchdown against Illinois.
So I see where you're going with that. I went with a different true freshman receiver in this category because we saw the the pseudo breakout game for Raiden Vines-Bright. I say pseudo because I think he has a lot more in the tank, and he's one of these guys where we knew what we were getting in Dezmen Roebuck after watching fall camp, and he's come in and shown exactly that. With Raiden, he showed it in the spring game, and there's still a lot in the tank there. Is the way where I'm going with this, because I think we've seen him make some plays in space, but we haven't seen one big thing from him yet. And that's a touchdown. I think he gets his first career touchdown in this game because Jedd Fisch talked about it during his Monday presser when I asked him about Raiden. And he said, yeah, it was a real bummer that we couldn't get him that. And that's something that Jedd has just week in and week out been like, oh yeah, we got to give Jonah this, and in terms of touchdowns and everything, where he called it a touchdown streak. And some everydayers corrected me about that a few weeks ago, that he didn't score in the Ohio State game. And that one was on me. And I feel like we'll see. That's why I wanted to go with Jonah early, but with Raiden, I think we're going to see him get into the end zone, because it was very clear that Jedd had a plan to do that against Michigan. And I think that they're going to try that same thing against Illinois, maybe in a slightly different fashion, but I like the odds on that one, let's say.
See, that's what it's when we always go back on Sunday and talk about how do our odds and predictions end up hitting. That's one where I think it's going to almost hit, but won't truly come to fruition, because I don't think he'll get the touchdown. Then he'll get the yardage. I think the touchdown in that realm, and maybe 2, goes to Decker to Graf. I think this is a game where Decker doubles down, Decker to Graf, because it's a little cliche there. But with that being terrible, I know. But with that being said, we talked about it going into this game that basically it's Decker to Graf and friends at tight end right now. And Barrett and Austin Simmons are going to be pretty good prospects for you down the line. I don't see them factoring in this week. I know we've talked about that, both on the website and on this podcast. So that means Decker's going to have to play a significant role in that. We saw him do that at Penn State, where DeMond just missed him a little bit. So going back to last season, I'm referencing there. We haven't necessarily hit on him this season as much as I think. And this is a game where we talked about Cole Russ earlier. Decker ends up having the most receiving yards of any tight end in this game, and as at least one touchdown. I would put the over under at 1.5, and I'm going to say take the over, but he has at least one touchdown in the game.
That's bold. I like where you're going with that. That's, just fits the tradition of the segment here. I want to flip to the defensive side after one thing. Reminder, that website, uwhuskieswire.usatoday.com, for all our everydayers out there. But I look at the defensive side of the ball, and somebody we've talked about a couple times already on the show is Alex McLaughlin. And he's Washington's leading tackler on the season. This defense is built for a safety to be really productive, basically lining up as a linebacker a decent amount of the time, but somebody with range who can just be there and fill in a lot. And I think this is one of those games where Alex can fill in. And I have him at 10 total tackles in this game, because I talked about Illinois' rushing attack a little bit earlier. I feel like there's going to be a point where early on they might try to establish the run, see how that works out. And Alex is one of those guys where they might not all be solo, but he is just consistently in there whenever you need a stop. Alex McLaughlin is part of that play. And I think that this is going to be one of those games where he's just going to be really productive.
See, you went under because I said 13 in the last segment, just as a hint there. So I think Alex ends up being, I agree that he ends up being the leader in total tackles, but I do think that number is 13. But I'm going to go a little bit different here, where the other theme of this show has been since the Wazoo game. There's a couple of different things we can go here. But on defense, 2 guys who had significant impacts in that game, Armand Parker and Zach Durfee. I think Armand gets his second career sack, and I think Zach Durfee gets 2 sacks on Altmeyer. So I think those guys combined, because I think, this is a game where, ironically, a little peek behind the curtain here, when the Parker brothers were being recruited, Illinois, and you remember who the defensive coordinator was when they were coming out, I believe. Exactly. Ryan Walters tried to get one of the 2 Parker brothers to Illinois, and it was Armand. And so I think in that respect, there's a reason, you're going to cook up something extra for him. And I think both those guys will have an impact, but give me 3 total sacks for those 2 guys. Give me Armand at 4 tackles too as well.
So that's nice and bold. I respect that. I went a different route with this. I stayed in the secondary, and I wanted to introduce a new statistic that we don't usually go with on bold predictions, because sometimes it can be a little bit subjective, which I hate, but that's a different discussion for a different day. I went with Tacario Davis getting 3+ pass breakups in this game. And the reason I want to do that is because Illinois loves to throw the ball. They're going to throw the ball all over the yard. And at a certain point, it's either, are you going to just stay away from the side of the field that Tacario Davis is on, or are you going to test him? And this could be one of those games where when we're talking about Tacario on the show in February, in March, in April, as someone who is one of the biggest rising names in the NFL draft, I'm sticking by that prediction. We're going to look at this game and say, oh, what did he do against that high-flying Illinois passing attack? Oh, Tacario Davis was incredible. This is one of those games where, yeah, you tried to test the 6'4" corner on the outside, but look at how good he was, and man, look at what he's doing here and there. I'm just really excited to see what he can do in a game like this because, as you said earlier, the fact that him and Ephesians Prysock are both back to being fully healthy is such a great sign for this defense. And in a game like this, where I know that Ryan Walters wants to, especially after what happened last year, wants to get over the hump and get a win against his former school. I feel like he's going to try to call on his senior leader on the outside to have a big day.
I like that a lot. And I think, it really does feed into, Efi getting his first pick since 2023. I want to say when he was at Arizona, ironically, again, against
he was robbed last year. He was robbed.
Yeah, Tacario has robbed himself a few times, So there's a number of things that I think this ends up being that fruition game for Washington. And do you want me to get to my prediction, or do we want one more?
Oh, I had 4. So if you got one more, go for it.
Okay, so I'm not proud of this, and I love Grady, but I have to do this. He's not perfect. He's not going to be perfect, but the one field goal he does make matters most, and it gets them the result that they want.
Oh, so I'm going to do this. I love that. I'm sorry. I'm so proud.
No, I was going to say, at this time, what did I do? I actually waited for it. This time I didn't actually go into the prediction unlike usual. But no, I do think when you look at the end of the game, Illinois covers. Spread is 4.5. Shout out FanDuel.
It's down to 3.5 now on FanDuel, actually.
Illinois still covers, I think, if I'm doing this correctly. Washington 20, Illinois 17.
Okay. All right. No, that's solid. I feel like personally, I like where you're going with the prediction. I had one other one that I wanted to get to. I was going to take the over in this game. I feel like there's just going to be a certain point where it goes touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. And the score is going to get run up just a little bit on both sides because these are two really good teams with two very talented offenses. And I think that's going to shine through in this game. But we're both extremely excited about what this is going to look like. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all every day who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the year. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Well, that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel through content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you after the game.